Greetings and salutations, everybody. Sean and I just want to comment on the speech that Jesse Williams gave at the BET Awards. Now, I understand his frustrations and his anger in regards to the social injustices and inequality that has been perpetrated against the black community. And some of the things he said in his speech, he had valid points on. But there's a few things that he said that sort of irritated me, and those are this, and I'm going to paraphrase. He basically stated that, don't tell me how far along we've gotten when paid public servants can perform a dropout on a 12-year-old playing in the park in broad daylight on national television and then go make a sandwich. And then he made something to the effect, said something to the effect of, tell Ricky Boyd how much better life is in 2012 than it was in 1612, 1712. And that's what I have an issue with. Now, I admit, and there are a lot of people out there who will admit that race relations are not where they could nor where they should be. That we have improvements to make. Nobody's denying that. At least a lot of people aren't denying that. But the fact of the matter is, to sit there and say that things have not improved at all is just ignorance and bullshit. Now, I'm not familiar with Jesse Williams. I've never heard of him prior to this whole BET situation. That's not me taking a slight at the man or being negative towards him. That's just the fact of the matter is, I'm just not familiar with him or his work. But what I do understand is he is a biracial child. So let's talk about that for a second. Interracial relationships are more accepted nowadays and more commonplace nowadays than what they were prior to 1965, where they were heavily frowned upon. Violent acts have been committed against people in interracial relationships in that time. So things have gotten better. Let's talk about 1965 and prior to that. What happened in 1965? That was the Civil Rights Movement, where black people gained equality. Prior to that, there was a thing called segregation. Ask any old timer about segregation. Ask anybody born prior to 1965 about segregation. My dad told me about segregation. There's an old black man I worked with named Charles who told me about segregation. There was a time where black people had to go to separate schools than white people. There was a time where black people had to drink from separate water fountains than white people. There was a time where black people had to ride in the back of the bus. There was a time where black people had to sit in the back of a theater, in the back upper section of a movie theater. There was a time where black people had to go into a side entrance or back entrance to get into that theater or certain establishments because they weren't allowed to go through the front of the establishments. There was a time where black people weren't even allowed in certain establishments. And if you want to talk about social injustices, if you think things are bad now as far as police brutality towards the black man, they were a lot worse in 1965, and the police could get away with a lot more, and the justice system allowed them to do so. There was a point in time in this country where the black man wasn't even considered a full man. He was only considered two-thirds of a man, two-thirds of a person, because his vote only counted for two-thirds of the person, and black women didn't even have that. All women didn't have that. We're going to bring up 1612, 1712. I want to bring up 1865 when the North defeated the South and the South conceded to the North, and then the process of freeing the slaves began. And the process happened between 1865 and 1868, if I'm correct. And I'm just trying to go off memory here. But be it here or there, let's go back prior to that, prior to the Civil War, back to the days of slavery, where the black person was considered property, where there were actual farm animals that were considered to be of higher value than the black person, where the black person was forced into manual labor, where they were forced to wear chains and they were shackled, where they were beaten and whipped, where they were severely abused, where black men were castrated, where black women were raped by slave owners, while black women were raped by white people, where black women were treated as breeder sows. So you want to tell me that things, or you want to allude to how things have not improved since 1865, prior to that, since 1965 and prior to that? To sit and make statements like that is just ignorance and it's just bullshit. And if you want to state that things have not improved, then you're lying or you're delusional, one of the two. Now, nobody is going to try to make light of the social injustices and inequality that's happening nowadays because there is a lot that's still going on. But don't act like things have not improved. Just because things aren't where you want them to be or where they need to be as a society, as a humanity, does not mean that we have not made any progress. Don't let your frustrations lead to ignorance, because that ignorance will do nothing but cause us to slide backwards instead of being able to press forward. Now, I'm just going to end it by saying this, and this does not count for the whole. This does not count for all white people. This does not count for all black people. But white people seem to think that things are better than what they actually are. Black people seem to think things are worse than what they actually are. And it's this difference of perception which causes irritation, aggravation, anger, and conflict. And until we start realizing that we are actually somewhere in the middle and we go work from there, it's going to take a lot longer for things to improve. But in any event, that's pretty much what I wanted to say in regards to that. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you on the flip side.